Good afternoon. Welcome on in. Another edition of the Full Court Press. Eric Frandsen, Jason Walker, 106.9 FM, 1390 AM, streaming on 1069thefan.com, the 1069 The Fan mobile app, and you can go back and listen to our podcasts after the fact as well. So if you missed it in real time, you can always go back and listen to your heart's content to all the things that we've discussed. Talking about a couple different things this hour. Jason making his way to Las Vegas.
Am I?
As you're listening to this, he is heading to the Mountain West Media Days for basketball, and very curious to see where Utah State lands on that list. We haven't discussed this before the show, but I have no idea where to even put the Aggies and where to expect the Aggies to be on the preseason media poll.
Yeah, well, as I'm thinking about it, I should know because I had a vote, so
You submitted a list.
My input will be included in that, and I want to say I put them 6th. It was either 6th or 7th, I think was the two I was including. I think I went more optimistic and put them at 6th. Because I think UNLV was a team that I'm kind of – I think some people have put UNLV above the Aggies, and that's something I think you may see. Some people obviously put them. One list I saw had UNLV above the Aggies, had the Aggies at 7th. But you'll see San Diego State at the top, Boise State there, Colorado State. I think it's going to make a big jump with some of the additions they made, and Isaiah Stevens. But
seemingly has been around forever.
Yeah, he has been around forever.
He doesn't age.
So you'll see the Aggies probably at 7th, I'd imagine. Lowest would probably be 8th. I think I had them at 6th, but probably won't see too much fanfare for the Aggies in terms of preseason work. I'd be surprised if anybody on the Aggies got any recognition.
Yeah, same. And I think it's not necessarily a slight against Utah State. It's just they don't know. Nobody knows.
And I don't even know. I cover the Aggies.
You've been to practice.
So I think, probably the one award maybe they could possibly get consideration for is Newcomer of the Year. And so there's going to be a preseason award for that. But there's so many other great newcomers in the Mountain West. So
it's going to be a fun year.
Yeah,
so it's going to be a good league.
Yeah, so as good as potentially some of these newcomers for the Aggies are, and I think they'll probably get some pretty good, end of season because the Aggies' best player is going to be a newcomer. So if they have a good season, they'll have the best newcomer or one of the best newcomers. So maybe by the end of the season, but preseason, there will probably be a couple others. I didn't vote for any Aggies for newcomer of the year, but it'll be interesting how all this goes.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And so we'll try to touch base while Jason is in Las Vegas. It kind of depends on what the interview schedules are and how that works, but we'll try to touch base while you're down there. Get the latest details on what's being said and the general feel of the room. You're going to try to get a conversation with the commissioner.
Yeah, I've submitted my request. We'll see. They haven't got back to me yet. I'm going to try and make sure that happens. Hopefully we'll be able to secure that interview. I know she's probably going to be busy. There's a lot of people who are going to want to talk to her.
Yes.
But hopefully I'll be able to be one of those, get a chance to have at least a short conversation with the commissioner.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. That's coming out this week as we are getting ready for basketball. But speaking of the Aggies, let's talk a little bit more about the football team. This is a point in the season where we're 6 games in the 12-game season, so it's time to hand out some midterm grades. So we're going to look at this in 3 different, maybe 4 different parts, actually. Offense, defense, special teams, and maybe just an overall grade for the team. And harken back to when you were in school. Maybe you're still in school, but it's midterms. And so how are the Aggies doing at the halfway point of the season? And, Jason, let's start with special teams. Let's build our way up. Not to say that special teams are at the bottom, but that's the group that usually doesn't get as much attention as the others. So.
They're on the field the least.
Yes. So special teams, we've had some injuries with special teams players through the year. Testa got hurt. Now Kotzenle is hurt. But that's going to maybe affect things moving forward. But as to this point so far, this is a special teams unit which has made some field goals, has missed a few field goals, has given up punt return for touchdown. Punt coverage last Saturday was not good and turned the ball over, gave a short field. So there's been some good things and some bad things with this special teams, which is kind of emblematic of the entire team
Yeah,
in the season so far.
It is kind of weird because the thing is that when you look at those mistakes, they have to drag my grade down. Like when I initially thought, I was like, okay, yeah, they've made some pretty good plays. Their ability to pin teams inside the 20, even inside the 10 or 5, has actually been pretty good for the most part. Constantly is doing really well, a lot better at pinning teams. Like he was, I think, I think he was among the best or worst as far as having the most touchbacks. He had a lot of touchbacks last year. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So that was something that he could improve on. And granted, it's not always on the punter because the coverage team plays a big role in preventing touchbacks as well. But that's something I feel like he'd improved on. So they've done well in that area. They've done probably slightly above average in field goals. You missed a couple, but they were missable field goals. So you kind of forgive a little. You don't give them a great grade, but you don't punish them too much for it. So overall, just when I add up all the negative and I add up all the positives, like you had a partially blocked punt, kind of bad luck with Iowa where it ended up rolling 20 yards downfield. You have a block kick that won the game for you.
Yeah, very true.
You've had Micah Davis, who's been a dang good punt returner this year. A bit of a bold punt returner, but a good punt returner. And as far as I know, I can't remember him making a mistake, actually, as far as one that's cost the Aggies. So he's been a net positive. Kick returns have been basically, actually, there was a bit of negative with kick returns. That was a James Madison game where they had, early on in that game, part of their problem was they were pinned inside their own, 10-5 because bad kick returns and a penalty or two on bad kick returns.
Right.
So overall, adding up the positives and negatives, maybe slightly more negatives than positives, but I just give them a C. You're not good, you're not bad. Just give them a C. I don't know if I can split any more hairs to give them anything other than average. You're good sometimes, you're bad sometimes. That comes out to average.
I gave the special teams unit a B-, and it certainly may have been a little bit higher except for what happened this past week, because I have to consider the blocked punts, the blocked extra points, the Micah Davis returns, the ability to pin teams. So I see that there's more of a net positive for the special teams unit. Not great, B- is an okay grade, but it's not great. And so maybe I'm feeling a little bit better than you, I guess, on special teams.
I feel like I might have been more inclined to give them C+, B- if they hadn't given up an 89-yard touchdown punt return. Had a
and turn the ball over.
Turn the ball over, which I don't know if I should give him too much hurt for that because it was a bit of a bang play. Xavier Steele wasn't making a mistake; he was trying to get away from the ball, and it nicked his foot. But it still happens. You also miss a field goal in that game. So it's it's, I don't know. For me, there's good, there's bad. Throw it an average.
Yeah. Okay. So you've given it a C. I've given it a B- for special teams. Let's go to defense. This was a team, a group for Utah State that for me was the biggest question mark for the team coming into the season. I felt like if Utah State was going to win games, they had to just win in a shootout. They had to outperform their opponents with just sheer offensive will. And because I didn't know about that defensive front, particularly questions at linebacker, youth, and somewhat inexperienced at this level in the secondary. And that's been proven. Those questions and concerns have bared fruit, that there were legitimate concerns. But as the season has gone on, they seem to be settling in and doing a little bit better. However, on the season, they're still giving up 32 points on average per game. So it's a defense that's doing okay and showing signs of improvement, but it's also a defense that has a lot of room to grow. And so, like my special teams, I'm giving them a B-. I see things that are positive and things that are moving in the right direction, but I also see a lot of mistakes and things that are kind of holding them back a little bit. So I'm giving the Utah State defense a B- at this point.
I feel like there's a difference in methodology here because I'm working from C as an average, and I feel like you're working from B as an average. Because that would maybe explain why I gave the defense a D+ here. Because, well, yeah, you look at the results, 32 points per game. You give up 33 points to the worst offense in the country. Gave up 45 to James Madison. I know in the second half they gave up only 7, but you gave up 38 in the first half, so not giving you extra credit there. Now, I do see the positives in that Colorado State game. The way they played, that saves it from being an F. Because, I mean, aside from that Colorado State game, what is this defense hanging its hat on? You have an FCS game where you still gave up 28 points.
True.
And Iowa, who's averaging about 22, 23 points, and you allowed 24. Like, that's the best they would have been able to hang their hat on, and that would be considered average to below average. And so you throw in the 39 to Air Force, 45 to James Madison, 33 to UConn, and that drags it down. But they just played their best defensive game of the season against a good offensive team. It wasn't like they just beat up on some bad offense and shut them out. They held down a offense that has been very productive. So I give them the credit for that. D+, improve from here. You know, if these guys can improve and show more, they don't have to hold guys, you know, the rest of the way to 14, 17 points. You don't need that. But if the defense can go out there, make plays, hold teams in the 20s, you know, hold maybe some of the bad Nevada, New Mexicos into the teens. But, you know, when you face a Fresno State upcoming, hold them in the 20s. Hold teams, you know, Boise State and others like that in the 20s. That's something that can raise the grade. Basically, play to where the offense doesn't have to make up for your mistakes the way they did, you know, with James Madison, with Air Force, all that. Granted, the defense kind of got hosed by some of the things the offense did in those games too. So, I don't know. For me, it's just the defense. Overall, they're not doing their job enough.
Yeah, and I can see that. I think that this is a team that has struggled with the rush offense or a rush defense, I should say, at times.
Most of the time.
Well, I mean, they did a good job against Colorado State, but Colorado State doesn't really.
They averaged 69 rushing yards per game. I hope you would do well.
They're not very committed to the run. So there are absolutely issues that need to be addressed continually with this Utah State defense. But it is a team that has 8 takeaways, interceptions, I should say. I mean, they have recovered some fumbles. They have been able to help the team get to 3 wins at the midway point. It's not all on the offense this year, but it's by and large because of the offense. But the defense is showing signs of improvement, and so I guess that's why I was giving them a little bit more of a positive take on it.
I say you showed improvement, therefore you are not failing.
That's true.
Like the Aggies were averaging dang near 35 points allowed per game going into that Colorado State game. That is pretty much by definition failure.
Yeah, that's not very good.
They are no longer failing. They are much improved. But that doesn't make up for the 5 games where you were not good. So, D+.
Okay, so on offense, a team that is well documented, that struggles in the first quarter, but is dynamic in the following 3 quarters. A team that is averaging 38 points a game, a little bit more than 38 points a game, has developed a dynamic core of wide receivers and several running backs who can tote the rock very well. But it's also an offense that turns the ball over, that gives their opponents opportunities, that struggles to get going. So similarly to the defense, there are signs of improvement, things to look positive about.
Are you going to give him a B- again?
But there are a lot of struggles here. So I'm going to give the Utah State offense a B- for my overall midterm grade.
So here's one where I'm actually more optimistic, because for me, when I look at, you know, with defense, it's kind of results-based. You're giving up 30 points a game. It's not super great. For the offense, I'm looking at the results. How many points are they scoring? They're scoring a ton. And in that sense, I kind of wanted to give them an A. And then I said, well, they haven't been perfect, so maybe an A-. But then, you know, turnovers, the fact that they can't play more than 3 quarters on offense. So I went ahead and went with a B+. This is a good offense. It is a good offense. potential to be the best in the conference. But yeah, turnovers and lack of consistency, i.e. just not playing in the first quarter, that keeps them out of being an A or an A minus. Based on the results and all that, yeah, it should probably be an A. But we talk about the 30-plus points allowed. Some of that is on the offense.
Yes, true.
Because they're putting the defense in bad positions.
Right. They're gifting the opponent short fields.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Colorado State game, the defense really probably only yielded, honestly, 7 points. That was what the defense just flat out gave up. 7 points. Because you can tie all the rest of their points to something the offense or special teams gave up. A punt return touchdown. The muffed punt. Interception to a short field. So the defense has kind of been screwed on quite a few points that they've ended up giving up, and that I end up, giving them the bad grade for. But yeah, the offense, they need to improve that to be a true A, to be that perfect unit, as you might say.
Yeah, it's an offense that's struggled with who's the quarterback going to be, who's going to be the consistent QB to execute the offense like the coach wants it to.
Yeah, none of the quarterbacks have been consistent.
No.
For all the guff we give Cooper Legault, McKay Hillstead hasn't started a first quarter good either.
No. And running backs, it's by committee, which sometimes
that's not a bad thing.
You think that's
actually not been a bad thing.
Sometimes, right? That is. It's not a good thing, but in this case, it has been a good thing.
You have 3 running backs by committee. It's
the depth at running back has been a godsend for Utah State.
Yeah, the depth at running back and wide receiver has been spectacular. You've got 3 wide receivers who are all capable of going over 100 yards. They all have 3 running backs that are all capable of going for 100 yards. I think 2 of them have. I don't know if Faison's done it yet. Actually, has Briggs done it yet either?
Well, did he do it in the Idaho State game? Either one of those?
I think Briggs might have. I think we might have got 2. Or maybe only, I don't know. They're all capable of doing it. They've all come close. And so, I mean, if any of them were a starting running back getting consistent reps, they'd go for 100 yards every now and again. But because of the by committee, they're not necessarily reaching that kind of arbitrary mark.
Yeah, Briggs had 101 in the Idaho State game.
Okay. And I think
Faison had 95.
He's close.
So he's close.
It was really close. It was almost the first time ever he had 3 running backs over 100 yards in a single game for the Aggies. Didn't quite. Just a few yards short. But yeah. So, and I mean, beyond the 3 wide receivers capable of going for 100, you've got a decent tight end in Brock Lane. You got Colby Bowman, who's capable of going for 63 yards on a single play. He's done that twice. And Otto Tia, who we thought would be better, but I think he's been injured a little bit, and I don't know, maybe Micah Davis is kind of taking his spot a little bit. But yeah, this is a wide receiver and just a receiving core overall that goes 6 deep as far as decently reliable targets.
Yeah.
3 deep in terms of almost elite level targets. It's pretty crazy.
It is. It's just great to see a full 4 quarters out of this team.
Yeah, just need 4 quarters. The offensive line to get healthy, get consistent. Quarterbacks to stay healthy and be consistent. Because everyone else is carrying this offense. Need some of those. That's the funny thing is the 2 most important position groups, quarterback and offensive line, are where the Aggies have struggled the most.
Yeah, that's true.
To have consistency.
Okay, so we've given our teams, the special teams, the defensive unit, the offensive unit, overall grade for Utah State. Now, my grades for each group have been pretty consistent. Yours have varied a little bit, so I think you can probably guess where my overall grade is.
It's at a B minus.
It'd be a B minus. I mean, maybe it should be a C plus because 3 and 3, it's very mediocre. But look, they're beating the teams they should beat. They're competitive against some really good teams. Like we talked about this yesterday, the combined win-loss total of the teams that they've lost against are 15-1, and so those are good teams. And 2 of those, things start out a little bit different in those games, and it could be a very different outcome. So this is I still give this team a B minus. They may have struggled against UConn, which is one of the worst teams in college football, but they were on the road. It was an early start. Utah State traditionally struggles against those types of situations. But they found a way to win, and a win is a win in the end. And so overall, at 3-3, this team I give a B-. When you have to include coaching decisions in there and how the coach is doing when you look at the overall team grade here.
See, for me, I looked at it, you said, all right, they're 3-3, so that'd be a C probably. You beat the teams you should have beat. You lost to the teams that maybe you should have lost to. But I feel like there were winnable games in there. So I gave them a slight downtick from a C to a C-. You know, you've mostly met expectations. They technically haven't met mine. I thought they'd be 4-2 at this point. They're not. They're off by 1 game. So a couple of winnable games that they dropped, but they were a good team. So I'm not going to punish them too much. C-. Room to grow. You're doing better. You know, if they don't make a bowl game, I'd give them a C-. And that's, I think, the trajectory they're currently on. So C-.
Yeah, it's fair. Totally fair. And this is a team that's facing another good team on Friday. But then after that, you can look at every other team, every other game they're going to or every other team they're going to face for the rest of the year, and see that those are all very winnable games now. Boise State is a traditional struggle, but they're not as dominant as they've been in the past. San Diego State is struggling. San Jose State is struggling. Nevada is bad. New Mexico is not good. I mean, so there are a lot of winnable games. And even this one, as we've seen, Utah State has shown they can be competitive against good teams. So I'm not necessarily just writing Friday off as a loss. I don't think they're going to win, but I think they're going to be competitive and they're going to give themselves a chance. But after that, there are a lot of winnable games on the schedule.
Yeah, I think every game at this point is winnable, including the Fresno State game, to a degree that, like, it's not just, technically you can win every game, but, like, at least 30-40% chance you win the game. Like that, in that kind of winnable, where, Fresno State, that's probably going to be your worst odds, where you're looking at maybe below 40% chance. But even then, it's like, there's a not insignificant chance the Aggies win that game. And you kind of expect them to be competitive for at least some of it. So, yeah, they could end up turning this thing around. There's a universe in which the Aggies go 9-3 this year. I don't think we're living in that one, but maybe.
It's possible.
But for me, I mean, if you just take it straight up and you think, in terms of odds of winning, the Aggies probably finish 5-7, but they're very capable of going 6-6, 7-5 if the improvements we began to see with UConn and Colorado State are real. If they're not real, then yeah, they're going to go 5-7. They'll probably beat Nevada and New Mexico and lose to everyone else.
Because those improvements were made against some really bad teams.
Yeah, and that's the key. Can they make those improvements? They've been competitive against good teams. They've also lost to every one of those teams. So I'm not going to give them credit for being competitive over and over if you can't win. So that's just the thought for me there. See them on a 5-7 trajectory. There's room for them, a realistic expectation that they can improve to a 6-6, 7-5 team.
Yeah, I mean, so far they are at where I thought they would be at this point in the season.
Yeah, they are.
So, but there's enough that they've shown me that give me hope that my preseason prediction could be wrong.
Yeah, you predicted.
But they've also given me some things that to consider that maybe I'm pretty much right on.
Yeah, like I said, you've been right on so far as win-loss. But yeah, as far as our expectations of some of the teams on the back end of the schedule have changed. And so we'll see. We'll see if the Aggies are able to turn things around a little bit and really figure things out. Because we're trying to be optimistic here. But they do need to make these improvements and put them into action. Because we can be optimistic. It's kind of like in the early season. I end up going wrong by being optimistic about the positives I saw against Iowa and Idaho State. I bought in too much, thought they could do it against Air Force, and I think even in the preseason, my prediction is I think they had them beating James Madison. Or not even losing, I can't remember.
I think you had them beating Air Force, but I think you had them losing to James Madison.
I had them winning against both, actually.
Because at this point, you had them at 4-2, didn't you?
Yeah, so I had them beating Idaho State, Air Force, James Madison, and Colorado State. So actually, preseason.
Oh, you had them at 4-1.
I had them losing to UConn.
Oh, no, that's right. That's right. Okay.
So,
All right.
Was a little wrong on that.
Hey, stick around. We've a lot more to discuss. Next, coming up, we'll be talking about the Utah Jazz as the preseason is underway, giving some predictions for the upcoming NBA season. Welcome back to the Full Court Press. Eric Frandsen, Jason Walker, 106.9 FM, 1390 AM, The Fan, and Jason making his way down to Las Vegas. So as we speak, as you hear this, I should say, he's with me here in studio, but he's on his way to the Mountain West Media Days for basketball, both men and women's basketball taking place, Media Days taking place in Las Vegas over the next few days. So find out what happens and how people think about Utah State coming up. But let's talk more basketball. Let's talk about the Utah Jazz. And this is a team that some new faces on the Utah Jazz, and we got our first view of them on Sunday as they took on the LA Clippers in Hawaii. And John Collins started. We saw some of the rookies in there. Keontae George played some significant minutes off the bench. So, and there are a couple other new guys as well. Jazz play tonight in Seattle, again against the Clippers. But before we preview that game and preview the upcoming season, give our predictions for the Jazz and the NBA, just what were your thoughts? Did you get a chance to see that game on Sunday between the Jazz and the Clippers?
I got to see a little bit of it. I was kind of trying to watch it at the same time I was trying to review the Utah State-Colorado State game, so I was kind of tied between two different screens there. So I was able to catch a little bit of it. Saw some good things. I think there's a lot of rust for some of these players, some guys that were struggling to hit shots that maybe you think they normally hit. You know, Markkanen didn't do super well from the field. Sexton didn't do too well. Talon Horton Tucker, all struggling in terms of their field goal percentages. But overall, his team does enough to get the win. So you certainly like that, the ability to, even with some guys struggling. I mean, Keontae George went 2 of 9. You had some guys doing well enough, to get the win. I know preseason wins don't matter, but you like to see a team win because there's kind of that, I don't know, what's the intangibles of just being able to get a win, even if maybe you don't have the greatest number. So it was good to see them make the plays that mattered, when they needed to make them.
Yeah, and I know we saw some things, and you look at a box score, and you're like, oh, man, Chris Dunn, he looked pretty good. And look at his how many points he had and what he was able to do. Well, he wasn't really going up against the Clippers starting unit. I mean, he got a lot of time in the second half. And look, I'm not trying to downplay what he did because he did look good, and he was making some solid plays, but it was against the Clippers' second or third unit. And so Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, I mean, they did play 15 minutes each. So you have to kind of consider what did the players do who were in the game when they were in the game, because those are still good NBA players that play at a very high level. So, I mean, yes, generally some things that are positive to take away. I think there's a lot of depth at the guard position for Utah. I know the running joke for this team is it's Hunger Games to see who comes out on top at the guard position. But that's a really good problem to have in today's NBA.
Yeah, well, I think the guards, unfortunately, when you say depth, they have a lot of guys they can play. I'm worried about, do they have guys that can play at a starting caliber level? And I don't think I saw that in this preseason game. I mean, we've all seen these guys play, and we've all seen most of these guys start, say for Keontae George, who hasn't played any real NBA minutes yet. But the thing I want to see is I want to see guys who can play starting caliber backcourt, play. And I wasn't super confident we were going to be able to get that going into the preseason. Haven't seen it in this first preseason game. We'll see how things go as the preseason gets along and as the actual NBA season gets along. I want to see Keontae George be a little more efficient. You do get the 5 assists out of him, so we're seeing a bit of the playmaking.
You got to the free throw line.
Yeah, get to the free throw line a decent amount. So I just want to see players that can be that lead ball handler because it's going to have to come from the backcourt. I know Will Hardy had his whole thing about, I don't need somebody to play point, actual point guard in the traditional sense, and I agree with that, but based on the rest of your roster, somebody in that backcourt is going to have to play lead ball handler based on what the rest of the starting lineup's going to look like. So want to see that from somebody. We're getting a little bit of that from Sexton, some of that from Keontae George. We've seen it from Talon Horton-Tucker. Chris Dunn showing out, but I'm kind of like you. There's some people that fawn over Chris Dunn and his numbers. I'm not one of those. There's a reason he was basically out of the NBA for a couple of years, or bouncing between a couple of rosters. He's a decent backup.
Yeah, he's a dog. I mean, he's out there and he fights for everything that he gets, and I think that's good to have on your roster. And I think that's somebody good to have in with your second unit or third unit. Yeah. They can still get out there and provide energy and get guys moving, but he's not your starter. I don't know that he's your primary backup either, but I like what I see out of him as somebody that you have depth when you need to call on that depth. If somebody gets hurt or you need to move some things around or you need a spark, Chris Dunn is that guy.
Yeah, and if he plays with the efficiency that he did last year, he's good enough to be your primary backup. And the reason that he was struggling is because he hadn't been that efficient. So far with the Jazz, I don't know what they did to them, but they made him a pretty efficient point guard on offense. So, but now with the rest of the roster, you're looking at Keontae George and Sexton and Horton-Tucker, and suddenly there's not room for Chris Dunn to be in that, in that backcourt consistently. So he does end up becoming a depth piece who probably doesn't play a whole lot in the regular season, barring injury.
Right. So the other thing that we're watching here in the preseason is how do Collins, Markkanen, and Kessler work together. And in game one, it's
okay.
It's okay. They've still got room to grow. But this is before it was Olynyk, Markkanen, and Kessler. And Olynyk is a little bit more of a passer, facilitator in the post who can stretch out and hit the three. I think Collins can do that. I mean, he did hit one 3-point shot, but it's a different style, very different style than Olynyk. So it's going to take a minute for Utah and that coaching staff to figure out how to best utilize his skills and how he works with the other personnel.
Well, and I think the passing is probably the biggest thing that trio may end up missing because Olynyk's able to, pass between Markkanen and Kessler. He has his own gravity thanks to his 3-point shooting. And so he was able to, he was a glue guy for that trio.
Yes.
And now they don't have that. And so the glue guy then has to, I don't know if Collins is going to be able to do that or maybe Markkanen's going to try and do that. You don't just develop that kind of passing, that vision, that kind of savvy that Olynyk has. And so that's why, again, keep tying it back to you got to have somebody in the backcourt who can do that. To be able to facilitate between those three, although the three do need to end up having some interconnectivity between themselves, an ability to pass between themselves. And you've got, all three of them are not the greatest passers. So somebody's going to have to develop. Collins maybe has the best chance of doing that. But even then, I think he's got some room to grow there.
Yeah, true. Talon Horton-Tucker, Colin Sexton, those were your starting guards for the Jazz, with Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench. Don't know if that's just because they want to limit his minutes because he played a lot in the FIBA World Cup. Just ease him back into it, or they're going to permanently move him back to a 6-man role, which he really flourished at before.
I think they probably are going to move him back to a 6th-man role just because these other young guys are the future. Clarkson, he's got a nice big contract extension. He's been fine playing a 6-man role. He's going to play the same minutes no matter what. Has a chance to win another 6th man of the year maybe if he ends up balling out this year. So I think the Jazz probably end up moving him back to 6th man as long as some of these other guys are healthy, as they try and move these other guys into, playing with their future core players, so to speak.
So Jazz play tonight. That game, I believe, is at 8 o'clock our time.
Yes.
In Seattle. And for those who want to see how the Jazz look in Game 2, with any adjustments after their first game against the same opponent, which will be kind of interesting to see how different things might look for the Jazz. But as we're looking at Utah and trying to figure out what this team is going to look like this year, it's got us thinking about who. If you look at some of those postseason awards in the NBA, if we were to just focus those on the Jazz, some of them, not all of them, but if we were to focus some of those postseason awards on Utah specific, who would we give some of those awards to, and who are we going to be watching? I think MVP, Okay, I think we can all agree Lauri Markkanen is the best player on
Yeah,
the team.
we all basically pick Markkinen. Some people want to do a hot take, maybe pick Collins or Kessler or, Keontae George or whatnot.
So we're going to call this best player not named Lauri.
Best non-Finnish player.
So who's going to be the most important player for the Jazz outside of Lauri Markkanen? And when I look at that, and I look at this roster, and I think about progression and improvement and role that they can play on the team moving forward, when I look at this team and think about that specific player, Walker Kessler comes to my mind because he anchors the defense, he directs traffic on defense, but I see more of an impact in his offensive game this coming season and how he can help the Jazz offensively, in addition to his excellent defensive presence for the Jazz.
Yeah, I think his two-way impact certainly can be massive. I don't know if he has much better than 13, 14 point per game potential, which may be a little crowded with some of the other players, going for scoring. But yeah, overall, he's incredibly efficient in the shots he takes. Great on defense, great rebounder. So yeah, certainly a, really important player, and was last year, for the team. For me, I considered Kessler. He was one of my big considerations, but I ended up going with John Collins. And I'm projecting a little bit here because it's going to take some improvement. It's going to take some, working with chemistry. So like right now, best marketing player is probably like Kessler or Clarkson. For me, going to project, and let's say John Collins, because this is a guy who can be this is a guy who's been a 2010 player, or close to 2010. And I think that ability to be a highly productive player, be a bit of a glue guy, if he can develop a bit of that passing, be a great player in that front court trio, he would very much end up being, I guess number two in this case, number two to Lauri Markkanen. And so I think John Collins really has that potential to do so. So I'm going to, go out on a limb here a little bit and just say John Collins, that number two to Lauri Markkanen's number one.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, that's a guy who had some great seasons in Atlanta, got a little bit of an injury, and struggled in his return from that injury, was a little bit stunted. And then things just, didn't quite mesh with some coaching changes. But he's a guy that definitely has a lot of upside, and we've seen what that potential can look like. And integrated into the Utah system, he could play a very large role for Utah and help on both ends of the court, offensively and defensively.
Yeah, if the Jazz end up making the playoffs, Collins will have played a massive role in that. In the same way that Markkanen played a role in the Jazz getting to 38 wins, Collins would be that same, impact to where he'd be getting consideration for most improved player and whatnot.
So let's actually talk about most improved player for the Jazz, and specifically for Utah. When I look at this roster and the players who did things last year and what I think could happen this year, and based on their expanded role and what they plan to do or how they could impact the team, I'm going to give my most improved player projection to Colin Sexton. Here's a guy who had moments last year where he was a spark plug for the Utah Jazz, and then he had the hamstring injuries, and those can be really tough to come back from. And so he was kind of limited in his minutes after that. But after a good offseason, getting healthy, here's a guy, there's an opening here where he can come in and elevate his game as a floor leader, as a more mature player, a little bit more time in the league. He has shown an ability to hit the three-point shot, be a facilitator, be a scorer as well. And I think that he can play a really big impact for Utah, as last year, at least the first half of the year, everything was on Mike Conley to run everything, and they didn't have to think too much because Conley did it all for them. Then the team had to try to figure things out without him at the back half of the season. With a good offseason and coming into this season with an opportunity to take an advantage of a larger role, I'm looking for Colin Sexton to be a more improved player for Utah.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good pick. I think there's a lot of logic behind that, and yeah, this is a guy that I think he's got a 20-point per game season under his belt. I think so. In a good role, he can be a good scorer, good good backcourt player. Honestly, in looking at this as far as mine, I think based on who I gave my secondary MVP to, I probably should have picked John Collins for this. I didn't, mostly because I just wanted to give it to a different player.
Considering he could be the most improved player in all of the NBA.
Yeah. So in that way, I probably should have picked John Collins, but just because I didn't want to be naming the same players, I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily shift him to the side and give it to somebody else. Give it to one of the younger players. Sexton was one of the players I consider, but I ended up giving it to Ochai Agbaji. I think this is a guy who could take a big step forward. Not so much in being this highly productive guy, but a guy who projects as this great 3-and-D player. And I think he's going to see a bit more minutes this season. I think they're going to try and work him into the lineup, not just as we're tanking the season, let's play Agbaji more. I think they're going to try and work him into the lineup a little bit more as he improves and as he gets better, and he'll be, an integral part of this team. I don't think a starter, unless he really shows improvements, because then maybe you'd throw him in at shooting guard, but I think he'll be a key player for this team.
I think that's good. I think this team has a lot of guards that can distribute and can score. It's got some big guys in the paint, but this team, there's a bit of a question mark on who's going to be that wing defender, who's going to be that other, shooting guard / small forward sometimes, that's going to sometimes have to draw the responsibility of guarding the other best player on the team. And so Ochai Agbaji, I think it's an interesting choice. That's a guy that showed some promise offensively last year, but also with his athleticism, I like his ability to be a more improved player defensively for Utah. So that could be a really interesting choice.
Yeah, and so I don't know if he's going to make the massive jump to, like I said, to even starter, but I think the jump, the getting the taste of guarding better defenders, and even playing on the bench, he's going to see a lot of good defensive matchups that he's gonna have to learn, and otherwise going to struggle with. So I think we'll see improvements from him to be a great two-way player, at least a good two-way player in his second season. So make some big steps there, the kind that don't necessarily show up on the box score, but that you're going to find yourself saying, dang, Agbaji's playing good today, over and over and over again.
Yes. Yeah. No, great point. Great point. Now, there aren't too many rookies to choose from.
We have,
really, there's 3, but
there's 3, and you could throw in, I think, maybe a couple others that are on the training camp roster.
Yeah, I mean, Sensabaugh didn't play in the first one. I don't know if he'll play tonight. But it's Hendricks and George, really. We might see some Sensabaugh as the season goes on. But let's lump in the sophomores for the Utah Jazz as well. So Kessler, Agbaji, I think you have to include them. I guess that would include Juzang.
Yes, it would, yeah. I think there's 6 or 7 players. Simone Fontecchio actually falls into that as well.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. So looking at those, we'll just call them younger players.
Rookie sophomores
for the Utah Jazz. A player you expect to see play a large role, or not necessarily a large role, but an impact player for the Jazz. And this might be a little bit unfair because Kessler's a starter.
Yeah, Kessler's still around there.
I mean, he played a large role last year and made a case to be considered as a rookie of the year in the entire NBA. So it's kind of hard to not just focus on Kessler, but outside of him, he's a 1A, but if there's a 1B, I think we already talked about it for me, and that would be Ochai Agbaji. Just that extra time in an NBA system and improving his outside shot, growing confidence in his ability to play at this level, and being a better defender as well. It was tough. It was close, actually, between him and Keontae George. But I'm going to be looking at Agbaji a little bit more.
I know I talked about Agbaji as my most improved player, but I'm not giving you 2 awards in the same show. Mostly because, with Agbaji, I talked about him making big improvements, but I don't see him as a starter. But the rookie that I see potentially getting a starting job is Keontae George, in a similar vein to what Walker Kessler did last year. And I think George could even have a bigger impact than Kessler because he could bring some scoring and playmaking. And it's not that Kessler wouldn't still be making an impact, but I think I'm kind of thinking of, okay, it's a bit of a newer impact. The fact that Kessler he's established. We already know what he's bringing in. He's part of the team. For Keontae George, the most important thing for him, as far as being the best rookie, is that he's bringing something new and it's making the team better. What Kessler brought to the team last year made the team better. And Keontae George can improve on that with what he can potentially bring as far as scoring and playmaking. I don't know for sure if he manages to get a starting gig. That depends if we're hearing about him from training camp and what we saw in some league. If that's for real, then this is a guy who by the end of the season is going to be in the starting lineup. He'll be getting some consideration for Rookie of the Year. Probably not for – it would depend. If he has as much of a rookie season as Donovan Mitchell did, he'd be in there for consideration. But there's a lot of good rookies this year.
Yeah, so, it's a long list.
You got Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren. I think Ben Simmons is going to be in there for Rookie of the Year again. They say he's like back. So this guy, Ben Simmons, watch out for him, Rookie of the Year.
It's new prospect. So he's coming.
So I don't know if Keontae George is going to get any real Rookie of the Year consideration, but yeah, this is a guy who could be a starter, be an impact player year one. And so even though Kessler probably is just still the best rookie sophomore on the team, being arbitrary here with my awards, give this one to Keontae George.
There you go. Any other individual awards before we give our win-loss record predictions for the Jazz?
Best hair?
Well, that's got to go to Jordan Clarkson, doesn't it?
I don't know. It's either Clarkson or Olynyk. Those are your two options.
So looking at the Jazz season, last year they had 37 wins. Looking at the changes that have been made this year, players coming back, where do you see this win-loss team for the Utah Jazz this year?
So I talked about how I feel like this team needs to make the playoffs for me to be comfortable at where they end up as far as actually making improvements. Unfortunately, I don't really see them actually doing that. I think I'm going to predict them missing the playoffs. Depending on record, I don't know if they actually make the play-in because that depends on what everybody else does. So I don't know if I can exactly predict whether or not they make the play-in. But I'm going to have them going 40-42. Slight improvements. Getting John Collins and some of the rookies perform. You can see this team slightly improve on what they did last year. But 40-42, honestly, actually is probably the max I would be willing to project. And so I'm sitting on that max because I want to be optimistic, but I don't see him doing any better than that.
For me, when I look at the team, the players coming back, there's still a lot of youth, but there's potential, but it's untapped, and they're going to have to go through some tough teams through the NBA. But I do see improvement. I see this team winning more games than they did a year ago. Last year they won 37 and just missed the playoffs. But I think it's a 4-game improvement. I've got them at 41-41. I think they're going to be right there in the hunt for that 12th spot in the play-in tournament. I don't know if they'll get it, but they'll be in the conversation. They'll give themselves a chance. I think they greatly benefited on the early part of last season. They picked up a lot of wins that we didn't think they would get. And definitely a different story in the back half. But I think this is a team that maybe struggles a little bit early, but improves as the season goes on. I think it will be kind of like last year, but in reverse. And this team gets better with really encouraging core, this Utah Jazz team moving to be a much more competitive team in the NBA.
Yeah, with experience, coaching, and synchronizing the whole team together with the newcomers. Yeah, I do think that's fair to say they're going to struggle a bit at first and just overall do much better post All-Star break.
Yeah. We've only got about a minute left here. We had a lot of other things on our list.
Had all NBA predictions.
Yes, we did. So let's just – who do you think is going to be the top team in the NBA?
That's tough because it's between the Bucks, Celtics, and Nuggets. I think Nuggets be the best team. But I think that the Celtics end up with the best overall record.
I'm going to go with the Phoenix Suns. Not a lot of defense there, but they're going to overwhelm their opponents with just elite offense.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I like these balanced teams. I like the Celtics for their balance. And I also like the Bucks for their balance. They got a lot better too. So
yeah,
I think Bucks and Celtics.
They got better offensively, not so much defensively, but they've got still some great defensive players on that squad.
Yeah, so I think we saw a lot of teams get better at the top end.
So Denver, do they repeat?
I think they can. I'd pick them as my favorite out of the West right now. I don't think anybody really got, better than they are.
I like their depth and their experience. They're going to be a tough team to beat.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for us tonight, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Utah Jazz pregame against the LA Clippers coming up at 8 o'clock. We'll have it here on The Fan later on tonight.